So welcome. Welcome to those who are tuning in on Zoom. Welcome to those who are tuning in on Facebook. My name is Sarah Stonecipher, and I am the digital missioner as part of lifelong learning at Virginia Theological Seminary. This webinar is brought to you by Lifelong Learning at Virginia Theological Seminary, which is focused on forming faith leaders and providing them with tools and resources to sort of help their lives and to help their vocations and to help their ministry. So part of two pieces of that are the eFormation Digital Media for Ministry Learning Community, which I'm the convener and coordinator for. And so that's focused on bringing 21st ministry tools for 21st century leaders. And it's also sponsored by Building Faith, which is our online platform for seasonal resources for ministry leaders. And we also have Keith here, who is the co-editor of Building Faith. So to introduce my esteemed panel, and they will do probably a more detailed introduction on their ministry context as well. But I'm joined by Keith Anderson, who is an associate pastor at Upper Dublin Lutheran Church in Ambler, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. And he is also the co-editor of Building Faith, as I mentioned, and he is my new colleague as of this summer, so it's really phenomenal to have him here. And he is a longtime eFormation leader and writer, including that of Digital Cathedral and Click to Save, and the reboot also came out this spring as well. So Keith has had a very exciting year in case you couldn't tell. And then I'm also joined by my colleague, and I do mean that absolutely sincerely, Andrea McKellar, who is the ministry developer for the Episcopal Church in South Carolina. So Andrea does quite a bit in South Carolina, including helping with transitions, thinking about how new ministries can sprout up in sort of that eastern half of South Carolina. And she is newly elected with me on Executive Council of the Episcopal Church. So I'm thrilled to be able to work with her even more over the next 6 years. So Keith and Andrea, I also listed all of our contact information, and it will be repeated later. But as you have questions, all of that will be available to you. And make sure, if you're watching and want to share, that you tag us on whatever platform you're on. So a little bit of a question before we launch in to Andrea and Keith's stories. So we are on Zoom, and on Facebook. So those who are on Zoom, you have the chat function, which many people have taken advantage of. If you have not yet introduced yourself and share where you're from, please go ahead and do that. If you're on Facebook, please go ahead and do that as well. All of our resources and this video will be sent out about 48 hours from now, and it will also be automatically saved on Facebook as well. So the chat box on Zoom might be underneath the ... and more, and so that's the easiest way to get in contact with all three of us. And of course on Facebook, you can just chat as if you were, if you're responding in turn, and Keith and I, maybe Andrea, will all see it, and we'll be able to answer your questions from there. So again, I'm so grateful that Andrea and Keith can join us together, and that we can really hear about their, unfortunately, burnout and frustration in their ministries, and also the healthy steps that they took in order to sort of modify their ministry and self-care in order to make it more sustainable. So thank you all so much for joining me, and I'm so excited to hear how your stories intermingle together, and where you've adapted your experience. So to go over sort of what that looks like today is that Keith is going to start us off with his story. We're going to go to Andrea. We're going to go over some tools and resources, and then we'll have questions and answers at the end. If you want to share your questions and answers on the chat, whether on Facebook or on Zoom, please go ahead and do so. And I promise I will be your voice when the questions and answers pop up. So then I promise I will not ignore you. I promise. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and launch into Keith and to his story.
Okay, thank you. It's great to be here and talking about this. It's kind of funny, like the reason we're qualified to do this is because we've all experienced burnout in ministry. So it's not that we have these perfectly balanced lives. It's because we've had those experiences and can share about them and what we've done in response to them. So I've been in parish ministry almost 15 years, 9 years as a solo pastor and 6 years in team ministry. And I've certainly had my share of moments when I've been fried, frazzled, burned out. I'm currently 5 days away from vacation right now. And so I'm feeling a little bit of that as I try to get everything done before I go. So I've definitely had moments where I've been very burned out, sort of burned out, a little burned out over time. And I think like achieving some kind of magical balance is just not, at least in my experience, that's not how it works for me. It's kind of ups and downs. And it's been a process, I would say, over time of getting to know myself, my limitations better, and be able to set boundaries better so that I don't kind of red line out, that I'm able to kind of see the warning signs and be able to pull back. And this quote from one of my friends and mentors, Tad Meyer, who's an Episcopal priest, is really my touchstone for thinking about self-care. Ministry will take everything you've got if you let it. And I think the two parts of that phrase are super true, that ministry will take everything you've got because it's an on-call job, whether you're a pastor or a lay leader, or you're on a church council or a vestry. The demands are constant. It's an on-call job, and human need is endless. Like there's no end to human need. It just keeps going. And ministry will take everything you have. And even if you have people in your congregation who are supportive and caring and affirming and all of those things, like in my experience, outside of my wife, nobody's going to tell me to stop. People are going to cheer me on to keep doing the great things that I'm doing, and they're going to love me. And but it's really up to me to say, I'm at a limit and I have to pull back, or I have to readjust. So I think the part about if you let it is that sometimes we lose sense of our agency about, self-care in ministry. We just feel like we have no choice and we have to kind of give until we're completely tapped out. And we do have a say over that. But I think it's easy to lose track of, and I lose track of it too. But if you let it, only if you let it. So I keep coming back to that. Tad told me that before I even started in ministry, and it's something I think about, I would say, most weeks in my ministry. So we can go ahead with the next slide. And so in addition to this kind of ministry calling, that's a kind of an on-call experience. You're dealing with human relationships and emotions, and it's messy, and it's beautiful, and it's complicated, and it takes a lot of time. And it's never really finished. We also have the technology side of this experience. So, this headline from Chicago Tribune kind of captures it. Everybody's exhausted. Stress and social media are taking their toll. And I'd say especially over the last couple of years when we've kind of seen the weaponization of social media, it is exhausting. And so that just amplifies some of those dynamics that are already present in ministry, where it's on call, you're present to a lot of people. You feel like you need to be available, and that's, what you need to do because you want to, and you want to connect, but at the same time, you often don't get you just can't go home out of the church building and then suddenly feel like you're away because there's texting and tweeting and Facebook and all these ways that people can access you. And as a pastor, I want people to connect with me, and I want to be accessible to people within and beyond my congregation, but there's never really like an off button, and I'm not great about, because my life is so tied into technology that it's really hard to just turn it off or say I'm stepping away from it for a time, because I use it in my parish ministry, I use it in my personal life, I've used it in my research and writing, in presentations and things that I do with my work at BTS. So I'm hardwired into the internet, and it is really hard to step away. So I think those two, so ministry is a kind of a calling where you feel that a lot, and self-care is hugely important. And then when you add to that, combining that with digital ministry, it's really, really hard. And sometimes it kind of happens kind of quietly, and you're like, oh, I'm just wiped. What happened? And you're like, oh, right. I just look back and connect the dots. So I think it's kind of a perfect storm for those two things when they come together as we do this digital ministry work. This is one of the, I created this meme one day at church when I was having a really frustrating day, because a lot of times I'm the technology person in the office, and I created this meme in a fit of just frustration that, like, yeah, I'm a pastor. Like, I'm called to like word and sacrament ministry. I'm not called to, tell you how to use your browser or your email or the Wi-Fi but we all wind up doing those things anyway. So I think that can be sometimes, when you're the person, and if you're watching this and you're thinking about self-care and technology, if you're the person, identify person in your setting that knows more about technology, and just a little bit more about technology than everybody else, you can sometimes become the de facto IT department. And that is not a lot of fun. In my book, The Digital Cathedral, I share these graphics about thinking about how we imagine church to be. And these were created by Bethany Stoley, who's an eFormation friend and a personal friend for the book. And I kind of, said, we kind of think about congregations, or we thought about them in terms of these flow charts when they, they're very clean and they're very organized and they're very linear and they're very predictable, right? But this is kind of a lie. like there are these kind of, connections and you're accountable and responsible to the people above you and stuff. But in the next slide, I think it sort of looks more like this, more like a network with these kind of thick and thin networked relationships that are part of. But then, like, as I thought about it further since the book and thinking about it in terms of digital fatigue and self-care, this is what I think about when I think of church now. Like, I wish in the book I'd smash these two together, because that's how I feel like I'm juggling kind of the church constitution and our command and control structure, and to kind of work within that. And at the same time, there are all these relationships and in these informal ways that we care for people and things that we do all happening at the same time. And so just looking at this makes me anxious. And so for me, this is a little more of kind of a reality of how things kind of go. So if there's ever a second edition, that'll go in. And just because we're in Philadelphia, there's this episode of Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is one of the sacred texts of living in the Philadelphia area. And the Pepe Sylvia episode, when it sort of feels like he gets crazed trying to track all this down. And sort of that's how sometimes it can feel to me, just like that, trying to keep it all going. So what are the deep sources of fatigue? And I'll kind of say these, express these for me, because Andrea probably and Sarah probably have different ones, and you listening would too. So we can just kind of run through these. Hopefully my slide works. Yeah. So I think we're always on for a range of constituencies and not just our parish anymore. So we never really turn off or tune out. We're always available. And like I said, I want to be available. But we're kind of always on in that way. I think, we're in this place where our lives are being consumed, like we're putting things forward to share, but we become like a brand or a product. And so I think there's a cost that I experienced in that people are kind of consuming me, and some sense of responsibility of keeping that up, of some way of providing supports, providing ideas, being me, and it becomes something that's commodified in a way. I think people look to us and have invested their hopes in us and inquire about us a lot. So if you're watching this and you're living in this kind of innovative space of technology and ministry, it's still, though there are some like networks like eFormation and Forma that have kind of robust networks, I think largely in the church, you can feel kind of alone in that, in your particular context. And so you might be the only person in your conference, your synod, your diocese, your area that you're the identified person, and that's a bit of a burden to bear. It can be when you're the person people go to most of the time in your area. I can I'm familiar with that. I think there's an element where we can be simultaneously celebrated and suspect. So like, oh, you're using this technology and it's such a great thing, and you're using technology and technology is so bad and it's undermining the church, and the way that we've known it. And so I find like that there's these two parts that I feel like in doing this work, there's this part of like it's lauded, and at the same time, people are a little suspect about it. So that wears on me a bit. So I think we can encounter resistance and misunderstanding and apathy about, people still ask, is digital technology real? Does it matter? People look for it to kind of meet the traditional metrics of ways that we've been church, and they don't necessarily fit into those categories. And so how will we kind of communicate that? So I think some of the resistance around that. I think we wrestle with hope and cynicism a lot, especially, it's been a tough go for social media in the last couple of years with all the news reports and the things we've learned about how it's been used, misused. And so, we're there because we want to share the gospel and we want to share the love of Christ. At the same time, sometimes brings out the worst in us as well. And I think, we can experience profound loneliness, even though we're hyper-connected. This is a theme that keeps coming up again and again in conversations I'm having. I was just talking with our township manager here in Upper Dublin, and he talked about loneliness as being something that the township is really wanting to mitigate, with community spaces. And we want to do that as the church, but we're working on a project for young adults. And like what keeps coming up again and again is these millennials are like lonely, and looking for community. So even though we have this hyper network generation, a lot of times we're like, as Sherry Turkle says, we're alone together. And so even though we're connected, we can feel really nice. So my survival guide, I'll just kind of run through the things that have mattered to me. Gotta cultivate a community, whether it's 3 or 30 people or both. And both of those are pretty good numbers. It's real. I really have to have those few people who it's like for me, talking to pastoral colleagues is such a gift because you don't have to explain everything to them. You're living a similar life and with a lot of burden. So a lot of it is given and assumed. I think the same thing in technology. If you're doing this work, like being connected to Forma or eFormation, networks of people that get what you're doing and why, and you don't have to kind of justify it or explain it. And people who can, inspire you and also commiserate with you is really important. And so if it's 3 really trusted friends, or it's kind of a 30, kind of person, kind of cloud of witnesses, for me, that's essential, that I stay connected. And most of those people for me are spread out across the country, really, because we've just kind of found each other online or through different events, and we stay connected. So got to cultivate that. Hone a dependable workflow. So I'm kind of been inspired a little bit by getting things done. And inbox zero, and I practice them imperfectly at times, and I've achieved inbox zero a couple times in my life. But just being able to prioritize. I use an app called Things, which is a beautiful to-do app for Mac and iPhone. So I try to use that. I don't always use it, as well as I should, but I try to do that. So in social media, one of the things I try to focus on is creating and not just responding. Because I think a lot of times when we spend time on social media, we're responding and reacting, and we mistake that for ministry and creating, right? Like, so I can be on Facebook and all I've done is just looked at things. I haven't really done much or created much. So I'm trying to use my time in technology now to really focus on creating, and it's not just responding and reacting. And when I'm tired, like I am now before vacation, and it's when I'm most tired, that's when I'm most just scrolly and, kind of responding and reacting. But when I'm a little more kind of energized, I really try to focus on creating, if that's podcast or it's video or it's a blog post. So differentiating that, because that time in social media can just all get mangled up together. So create, not just respond. Rethink your time in continuing education. So a couple of years ago, for my continuing education time and some funds, I took an online class of how to use Final Cut Pro, which is video editing for the Mac. And I created a couple of videos for our congregation having done that. But I'm a digital person, and it still was like, oh, right, I guess that is continuing education if I do this class. So, if there are things that are taking you a lot of time to do in digital space, maybe there's some continuing ed time or money that you could use, or maybe your congregation could support you somehow with getting a little more aptitude in those areas, because it's going to save you time in the long run. Narrow your intake stream. So, this says more about my age than my technology prowess, but I'm mostly more on Facebook and sometimes on Instagram, and I'm just not on Twitter a lot because I just can't keep up with it right now. And so I'm trying to focus my intake, and I'm really trying to focus on the people and things that I really truly care about, and not just a lot of the noise. So if you can narrow the stream a little bit and refine your news feed and who you're following, what you're following, I think that helps a lot. How many emails do you get every morning? Things that you subscribe to? Do you really need to subscribe to those things? A lot of times I just kind of call out every now and then, say unsubscribe, unsubscribe, unsubscribe. I could always come back to it, but I need to clear some of those things out. Make sure to nurture your physical health. I have a mantra that is, I need more maintenance than I used to. And so I've been trying to commit to more physical health, but when you're sitting at a computer a lot, it's really hard. But that for the long run really makes a huge difference to tend to your physical well-being. Have non-digital hobbies, so go analog. And I don't have a lot of those. I guess I run, I hike. I run and I hike, and swimming is good because I can't take my phone in the water, but try to find analog things to do and practice digital Sabbath. So turn off when you're able, if it's for 10 minutes or 2 hours or for a day, we can do it. Sometimes for me, I need to, when I'm feeling low in one area, I need to draw energy from another area. And so for me, one of the things that gives me a lot of creative energy is the kind of side projects that I do and special projects that I take on either personally or in collaboration with others. And those really help to feed into my pastoral ministry. And a lot of times my pastoral ministry will feed into the kind of vocation and avocations. But, if you're doing the special projects, a lot of times that's where people derive a lot of energy and satisfaction. And sometimes I think you can leverage that into kind of your everyday work. Have a digital rule of life. And I wrote one of those in the Digital Cathedral. It's one of the chapters in my book. So you could check that out or look on Google Books, probably it's there. Borrow in that's drawn from the rule of Taizé and the rule of St. Benedict and the rule of Essek. So it's kind of grounded in historical rules of life, but for a digital age, so you might want to check that out. And then say no, and I put question mark because it's not easy to say no, and I'm not great at saying no. So it's definitely easier said than done. And saying no is not always a popular thing. I've said no a couple times recently because I'm trying to focus my work. So I've kind of been in this shift of I've been doing lots of different things like teaching and presenting and blogging and writing. And it's no, I'm just doing my work with VTS. I'm just doing things related to that. And so I'm cutting out a lot of other things. And I've had to say no to some people. And the responses were either silence, dead silence, or a little smirk. And so, saying no is not the easiest thing to do, I would say. And then I kind of live by this quote by Steve Jobs. And so when you get the slides, you'll be able to click that link for YouTube. But basically it says, you really have to keep your passion kindled. So, right, it's just not keep your passion kindled because any rational person would give up. I feel like ministry is that way. Like any rational person would say, this is madness. What? This is crazy. And would give up. And sadly, ministry, can really take all of you. And a lot of people do leave ministry. But for me, it really, there are lots of ways to look at self-care. But if I can keep my passion kindled, I feel like that can see me through a lot, especially at down times. So staying connected to what that passion is. And more Steve Jobs for you. When he finished his Stanford thing, he said, stay hungry and stay foolish. And I think we can stay connected to our passions and the reason that we're doing this. and kind of feed those places and those, that creativity. And that's the great stuff about digital space is, stuff you might not get to do in your day-to-day work, but, because you can blog, because you can create digitally, you can find these outlets for your creativity and find energy there. So yeah, just hang in there. We believe in you.
Keith, thank you so much. I love your approach of like, this is something that that happens to us, and it's good to acknowledge and to like figure out what those like critical steps are to both acknowledge it, and then to like realize that it's a universal issue, and then the steps to sort of make it less so that way you're not as burned out or as fatigued to such an extreme. All right, speaking of extreme fatigue, it's now Andrea's turn to share her story with us. And so you got a little preview of it because I clicked fast. So, oops, let me.
Not that the fish gives you too much clue, but so thank you. I love being able to go after Keith. There's so many things in there that were points that have really helped me. So I'm glad that we were able to reiterate that. So I first gave a version of this at the Forma conference in January, which is held here in Charleston. And we did an eFormation pre-conference. So I led this workshop right before hosting a conference for 425 people. So not really the time I was practicing my best self-care, but it was a good reminder then even. But why there's a betta fish on the screen. So September 2015 there was a Tuesday that we have a betta fish that I leaned down and looked in the tank and said, I need you to die because I can't take care of one more thing. We had gotten to the point that there was work things going on, and then a longer story for another day, I started a congregation in a funeral home as a volunteer, and so I was senior warden doing the communications and Christian formation, and had just taken on the stewardship campaign for the fall. My father-in-law was dying. My daughter had just gotten kicked out of preschool, which we then figured out was because she had an undiagnosed developmental delay that was causing problems in school. My in-laws' house had flooded. This has all happened in like a 2-week period. And I was done. I was taking care of everyone but myself. And I realized that I couldn't do that anymore. And I had to step back and figure some things out. It wasn't sustainable. The funny part about the fish is that it was a giveaway at a 4-year-old birthday party. So pro tip to parents, don't give living things as a party favor unless you're willing to say things, and you have to come over and feed it.
No.
So luckily, wasn't that cruel? Right, yeah. No, in a bag, sent home in a bag. So poor Flash had survived 2.5 years. He just passed away this fall. He almost made it 5 years. But he was not the problem. So we had all these things going on that had been just overdoing. It turns out my father-in-law ended up passing away the next day, which was the break in the dam. And luckily work was like, we're good. You go do family stuff. And it ended up being good that my daughter was off because she was able to be home with us during all the family things, and church took over some of the church things, and everyone was able to pull back and help take care of me as I was taking care of others. And it made me realize that when you hit that wall where you can't do anything but cry, where you don't have the energy to do anything else, that you really have to change. And I had no concept at that point what self-care was. So I found an article that my favorite quote from it is, true self-care is not salt baths and chocolate cake. It's making the choice to build a life you don't need to regularly escape from. And this whole article is actually going to be, it's posted in the additional resources. But I had to realize that self-care isn't just taking a break. It's really reinventing your life and setting up all the things you do on a day-to-day basis to be better for yourself and your family. So I was able to do that. I did this by making myself a priority. So there was a sermon I heard a few years ago that the priest said, where we tend to do is work, family, ourselves, and then God. And we have to flip that. So we have to put God and then ourselves, because if we aren't taking care of ourselves, you don't have the energy for other people. And really hit that the hard way. And you have to do it with no guilt. You have to realize that that is the most important thing. And that was really hard for me. This is a really great time of year for church workers. And before I worked on the diocesan level, I was a parish director of Christian formation. So I remember that stage very well. So you're setting up your program year, you have your whole calendar. This is where you need to look at it now and say, okay, yeah, you can't take Advent off, but you can make sure you take an extra Wednesday, or you find a church that you can go to for a midweek service and sit in a pew and just be part of a service. So look ahead. You can't leave things out. You can't be gone on Christmas, but you can say, okay, this is going to be a time where we're going to need that. At the church I worked at, what Keith had said about saying no was one of the big things I learned. The church I worked at, the priest asked us to move the Habitat for Humanity build day to my birthday because he didn't want it to conflict with a football schedule. And I said yes. And then he ended up not showing up that day. And so that was where I realized, no, it's okay to say, actually, no, we need to leave it on this day. If you can't make it, we understand. But it's okay to look through those things. So as you figure out what self-care is for you, that was important to me. I have learned that for me, I'm an introvert that extroverts really well until I hit that wall. So I have to have alone time. And so that is, it doesn't even matter what it is most of the time. I just need time where there's no sensory from people. A lot of times, as Keith has said, I've found that it's walking, hiking, running in nature, being outside. I love running in a city. But in the side streets and things that are a little out of the way, or early in the morning when the city's waking up. I love watching a city wake up. But being outside, I listen to a lot of audiobooks that way, a lot of podcasts. And I turn off all my notifications. So my phone is not being interrupted during that time. That I've learned that you do have to make sure that the kids' school can call. My kids are now starting 1st and 4th grade. So I have a couple things that can come through, but all the other things are turned off so that there's no outside influence on that. This especially hit me hard after General Convention because I was online the whole time. I was on Twitter 24/7. It felt like I was on Facebook. I was on Instagram. And I've almost gone back to lurker status the last couple weeks as I've tried to realize that I need to get that time back. But as we all are, if part of your job is being on social media, you can't be completely off. And so I've stepped back from what I can and I'm slowly getting back into it. But you can't just turn it off. So self-care can be whatever it is for you. I have a friend that it's ironing her sheets. It can be watching cat videos. It can be going to get coffee at your favorite coffee shop. For some people, it's being around other people. So you can have go walk with your best friend, meet them for a movie, listen to music, but figure out what that is for you. But then the most important thing after that is sharing that with other people, setting up the boundaries about that and being clear, this is what self-care is for me, and letting your family know, your coworkers, things like that. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So then one thing especially for church workers is the need for Sabbath. Since we work on the Sabbath day, we have to take time that's separate. So what I've done to make it exact is I put it on my calendar. And Sarah, you can go to the next slide for this. I schedule my Sabbath time, and it's on my Google Calendar that I live and die by, and I share it with other people. They know that there's a few hours on Friday morning during the school year that's my time. I don't use it for grocery shopping. That can happen on a Saturday, I've learned. I don't have to run all my errands on a Friday. I don't take work appointments then. And you can say that in one thing that's great is to let people know is put it in the footer of your email. Friday morning is my Sabbath time. I'll be happy to reach you after that time. Other important things, Keith talked about having that group, finding a partner in ministry who can take over that role during your Sabbath time, and you can do the same for them, can be really important. If you're a priest, it can be a layperson that can do pastoral care and can triage what is an emergency and things like that. Someone that already works for the church If you have other people, if you're a director of Christian formation, for example, you can talk to the communications director. They can run your things during those days, things like that. That's been really important. And what I talked about before, what I realized is because especially when I worked for the church, Sunday morning doesn't feel like worship to me. And so I also have found that time to do a midweek service, to do for day by day, do morning prayer, do evening prayer, do compline, find times that you're doing that. So some of the things that have worked best for me is creating community. I talked a little bit about, so I realized I was finding what I needed for self-care and giving that to other people. So I was creating time for people to have that space that I needed, but then was wondering why they weren't thankful for it, but that wasn't what they needed. So I had to realize, okay, I need to tell people this is what I need. So my coworkers know that Friday mornings is my time to take a walk, and they know not to send me an email. They know I'm not going to respond to an email, and they'll help me out in that. They'll take those breaks away. Other things, I have a Facebook message group of people that I've met through conferences and things like Keith was talking about. That's a group of women, all Episcopal, that work in different churches and diocesan levels, but we're all over the U.S. We don't have any contexts that overlap. So we can just be supportive to each other. There's no competition. There's no worrying about confidentiality. Everything, I mean, this morning they were helping support me through something with my daughter for school. We've helped each other through deaths. There's so many things, but we also joke and, put up a picture of a dress to see if people like it and things like that. But yesterday someone needed a youth retreat curriculum for saints. And one of the other ladies was able to call and give her a program that she'd done. So having things like that has been really helpful for me. We help each other in ministry, but we also are just a huge support network for each other. And so that's an online community that's been helpful for me, even in Sabbath time. Prayer apps have been important to me. I like to do pray as you go when I walk. The Runkeeper app I noted here because, so this last fall, I was realizing I was looking ahead at the calendar and knew that was going to be a stressful time for me. And I said to that group of ladies, I said, I know this is going to be a problem. I need you to help keep me accountable. And they said, what do you need? And I said, I need to make sure I'm exercising 3 times a week, because that's when I know I'm okay, because that means I've had alone time, because I always do that by myself. And they said, great. And they created a Runkeeper group, and they set up a goal for 6 weeks that we were going to exercise 3 times, and we check in on each other. And if they weren't doing it, they knew they could come to me and say, okay, Andrea, what's going on? You haven't done this. Or the good job. We see you're out there. How are you feeling? And it's really good on my walks, even though I'm by myself, to know that someone else is keeping that eye on me and supporting me in that. So I found that's an important way to do that. Some of the other prayer apps, Forward Movement has a great app to do morning and evening prayer that puts all the readings in and things, so you're not flipping through the prayer book all over the place. That makes set time. But one of the big things I say, using technology to unplug, there are apps that you can use to track your social media usage. So you have to be on, but don't be on all the time. Know when you need to take that break. One year for Lent, I've actually done the last few Lents, I make it that I don't check any social media until I'm entirely ready to go in the morning, so that I'm not checking as soon as I get up. And then I'm down a rabbit hole reading an article in the New York Times, and then I'm checking Twitter, and then I've read 6 threads, and now I'm running late. So I completely get ready, have breakfast with my kids, make sure everybody's out the door, and then if there's still time, I can check that. But make it an after. I read an article that said we actually have more free time now than any time in history, but we've just filled it differently. We're not making butter. We're not milking the cow in the morning. There were all these things we were doing that we filled, and we feel like we're so busy, because we are, but we filled it with new things. So we just need to remember, one thing that's been important to me so that I'm not running crazy is my kids can have at most 1 activity outside of church. So we do all of our church activities, but they're allowed 1 sports team, 1 piano lesson, 1 thing at a time. Because I'm not going to run every night to a different place when I need to be at church two nights a week already. And then church stays that priority, that it's not the, oh, we have soccer, so we can't go. It's, oh, we can't go to soccer because we have church. And that's been important to my family. My kids are still young. We're too young for travel teams and things like that. So I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but it's just something that's helped me stay sane through the last couple of years. And I've really, by looking ahead, the most important thing I can say is by doing that calendar planning, by looking ahead and looking what's going to be the busy time, and set something that's a treat, either right after, like knowing that you have a vacation coming, or even just an extra day off somewhere in there, has been really important to me. So I think that's all I've got before resources.
So I think these are some of the resources that I recommend. And these are just books that I've been reading lately that have kind of helped me get through. The Springsteen book is fabulous. Like it's also good to read things that are not in your area. You know, I've read a couple of musical biographies lately, and like it just got my headspace in a different area. I was able to use them in a sermon anyway, of course. So there's always a way. But a lot of these are about kind of keeping your passion kindled. And you know, the Gift, the book, The Gift, on chapter 8 is tremendous, and anything by Seth Godin, and I subscribe to his daily emails as well, are really good. And stuff on leadership on the line and adaptive leadership, really great stuff, because I think that really acknowledges the risks and the dangers of leading and how to help manage that. For me, Annie Dillard's The Writing Life saves my life monthly. It's so good. For me, being a writer, like the pathology of writing is very, it's you know, their writing is about dealing with failure and recovering. It's about being present, fully present to the world, and wrestling with what that means. So that's one of my favorites as well.
And I mentioned the article that's the last one there is the one that I pulled that quote from that I used. And there's also a lot of really great stuff in that article that's been helpful. It's not church worker related, but just all the things that are overlap in daily life. And then next, you mentioned a lot of the different apps that I referenced, and a few others I think that I didn't. One other that I didn't put in there but thought of when Keith was talking was Unroll Me, which is something you can use for emails that will take all those things that you signed up for, and you can click, and it'll pull them into one email at the end of the day if you feel like checking it. Don't usually. And keeps it out of your inbox.
And
so yeah, so there's lots of prayer recommendations. I found list making has helped me to do to-do lists. I do a lot of Keep apps. I have friends that really like Asana, Evernote, and Trello, so I mentioned all of those. Some of those too are really good for if you have multiple people working on the same project, that you can keep apps together. And then Google Calendar is what saves me most of the time. I put everything in there. Grocery shopping even, just so I know when things are going to happen and I don't stress about when I'll get things done. Exercise is really important in self-care, and it doesn't mean running. Most of mine are just walks, but just taking care of yourself. If you feel good, it really helps your daily spirit. Fitbit has been great for me, any activity tracker, but I use the sleep part of Fitbit's important to me. It tracks my sleep, and the breathing. For my daughter who's special needs, we use that to calm her down at night. She calls it the stars, but there's a way that it tracks your breathing. And then if you're breathing in and out enough, you get all these stars. And so she asked me for the stars at night. So we do that to help calm her down before bed. And then highly recommend any of the apps that you can use for listening to books and podcasts.
Keith, were there any others that you wanted to give a special shout out to that we didn't mention already?
I love Headspace for meditation. I use that regularly, and there's all kinds of themes. There's stuff for stress, for sports, for walking, all kinds of different themes. So there's a daily meditation, and there's like, you can do, it's like a pack of 30, and then you can do one each day, and you can do from 5 minutes up to like 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So it doesn't have to be a long time that you do it. And then Pause is an app I like, where you basically trace your finger around on the screen of your phone. And it's sort of like there's all these blobs, and as you go, it kind of comes together into like a big blob. And so it's like your whole like fractured, kind of everywhere life's like you're kind of coming back to center. And that's like a 3-minute little thing. So when I don't have a lot of time, but I need to breathe, I use that.
Awesome. I know we have a few questions. So Andrea and Keith, thank you again for sharing your very personal stories and resources. So I know Catherine Doherty on Facebook said, how do you manage a Facebook profile? Do you friend parishioners and use that space for both personal and professional life? Or do you have two separate accounts, a private/family and friends Facebook profile and a professional Facebook profile? And as I say, I think all three of us are blending of the two.
Yeah, I was going to say I just have one, but what I do is have lists. So there's things about my children and things that only certain people see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm the same. It's one profile on every platform, but like on Facebook and stuff, I use lists. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So lists seem to be the way. I know, I think Diocese of Virginia recommended that this is an interesting solution, that all that rectors unfriend parishioners and then do a private Facebook group or a closed group. So that way they could be interaction, and it could be a pastoral presence there if needed, but there wasn't the sort of like insertion of public and private. So Keith, do you have a closed Facebook group for Dublin, or Andrea for you for funeral home church? I know that there's a name to it, but...
we have a page, and then we have different groups for different projects. So the youth group and other groups have their own Facebook groups as they need them.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say we just have a page, but I only friend people if they request usually first, but I found a lot of times pastorally, the things that they post on Facebook that they might not have shared in a private group, that I find out things that when there are needs that we can reach out for. So I actually recommend if within policy, friending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's like your parishioners see that you have an actual life outside of church, which helps.
Crazy thought.
And then, your friends who don't go to church can get a window into what that's all about and see it through you. So they're kind of willing to give it a chance.
Great. I'm not seeing any other questions so far. So I think that was our only question for today. We did get a thank you from Lori for information and suggestions are very good. I appreciate the effort to pull all of this together. So thank you. And I'm really impressed how well yours merged together and how complementary your stories were. So here's our contact information for Andrea, Keith, and me. I saw somebody already followed me on Instagram, so thank you. I don't think I got any more Twitter followers as of yet, but that's okay. That's okay. I'm not counting. Sue says it was a much needed pause. So I'm glad that we could pause with technology in order to give you a little moment to be self-reflective. And that's a good thing to do, especially before the start of the program year, which is why we planned it this way, to get you set up, well before the crush of the program year begins in August, September, whenever your homecoming Sunday is. So please keep in touch if you have any other questions. And I will be sending out all of these resources as well as the video within the next 48 hours. So the self-care for me is giving myself 48 hours to send this out via MailChimp. So gotta make it work. And so our next, this is one of our series of webinars, and our next webinar is on September 19th, so it's the middle Wednesday of the month, at the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern, and it is Fresh Ideas for Stewardship Season. So this is, again, sponsored by Lifelong Learning at Virginia Theological Seminary, Building Faith, as well as eFormation. So Andrea and Keith, thank you again so much for being a part of our experience today, and I greatly appreciate, again, you sharing your stories and vulnerabilities, questions, anxieties with us, and hopefully the solutions as well, which are equally as important. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go off of Facebook and Zoom. But again, please be in touch if you have any other questions or comments or want to share with us your experience. And Keith and Andrea, just go ahead and stick around for 1 second. So, thank you again for everyone who attended, and we will be in touch soon.